Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece Chapter 1100 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Pardon me if you think that I sound a little bit different today. I'm sick. It is what it is. But it didn't take away from what was a great One Piece chapter. Oda is the absolute king of misdirection. This chapter was no different. I know I was not alone in thinking that the Kuma flashback was wrapping up. I know it. But be careful what you assume. You know what's even crazier about this is that most of the chapter did not really include anything that I would consider to be like crazy or unexpected. Most of the chapter, not all of the chapter, obviously we'll talk about the end. But what Oda did with it was absolutely astounding. And this chapter, you know, I don't think it was as good as 2 chapters ago, but it's like top tier 10 out of 10 level of just making me feel things. This is also a chapter which reminds you that the process of thinking about the story as a writer, as the author, is different than as the fans. Ultimately, what you include in the story should be dependent on what's coming up, right? Like, everything sort of has its place. Fans think we know what's coming up next, but Oda literally does. So he knows what he feels like he needs to include in order to make what comes next hit at the absolute peak that it can. So basically what I'm saying is the general observation I made about this chapter is a lot of time was spent getting to better know Saturn the Gorosei, Vegapunk, Kizaru, and of course we've been learning about Kuma and Bonnie. 4 of these characters are absolutely crucial to the current events taking place in Egghead right now, and we've been speculating now since basically the chapter after we last saw Kuma that Kuma's probably going to end up in Egghead as well. So this chapter covers the range of all the non-Straw Hats that matter in the present story. And it's not just the fact that they're existing within the chapters, like, my perception of the characters is still evolving right now. Vegapunk is so fascinating and has totally redeemed himself of any thought that I could have ever had negative towards him. Is he a fool? Kind of, yes. This is really evidence, we didn't talk about this in the last chapter, but making Kuma into the weapon which represents the government and Kuma as literally a wanted man doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the fact that Vegapunk pursued this even for an instance really illustrates the airheadedness that he has. There was literally zero chance that Vegapunk could accomplish his aim without the government knowing or with their approval. Zero chance. Which I don't dislike, it's just part of his character. He has so many ideas, he's like a kid in the candy store, and I just get the impression that a lot of the times when he has these ideas, he doesn't think it through fully in terms of the means to be able to accomplish them, and all the facets of that. And it's ironically this short-sightedness which has put Vegapunk in the precarious situation he finds himself in now. He had an opportunity to join the Revolutionary Army. We said this before the flashback, but in chapter 1095, Saturn makes it clear that he wants to punish Vegapunk in the cruelest manner possible. He says, I want you to die, cursing yourself for daring to cross the world government. And I thought at the time, and I think to this day, if Vegapunk dies, he's not going to be cursing himself for crossing the world government, he's going to be cursing himself for ever joining them. So genius or not, Vegapunk has very clear character flaws which lead to him making mistakes. And in my opinion, this chapter has offered the best, the most tangible evidence which substantiates this and allows you to appreciate it. I can't be the only one reading this chapter thinking Vegapunk is kind of a fool, and that is the point. A small character moment from this chapter is going to elevate Egghead when we get back there. But it didn't just highlight Vegapunk as a fool, it also highlighted the good-naturedness of him. You know, he's a good guy. While you could have thought this before, this was, in my opinion, the nail in the coffin. It took basically the whole arc, but we now know for sure who exactly Vegapunk is. And if you really think about it, how Oda paced it out is just brilliant and mind-blowing. Hearing Saturn's plan for Kuma, he's like, absolutely no way can my conscience allow me to do this. So I would expect these same sorts of rules would apply to Vegapunk throughout the course of his life, his tenure working with the Marines. I would heavily guess that Saturn or the Gorosei, the world government itself, manipulated and coerced Vegapunk into a lot of things. Or just straight up, Vegapunk was held back because of morals. But of course, this is only one of the characters that we wanted to highlight. There is absolutely no question that I hate Saturn more now than I did at any point before. And it's mainly just a product of spending time with him, getting inside of his mind, and having some more like really concrete examples of pure evil. Made all the worse because the evil is very human and not just like demon overlord. I'll grant him that making an army of Pacifista based off of clone from Kuma was not a great idea for his interests, and I could forgive him for rejecting it. But how he used an innocent child who was a celestial dragon no less, to blackmail Kuma into getting exactly what he wanted literally makes my blood boil. And it's also really fascinating because we follow the journey from the Straw Hat's perspective, from Luffy's perspective, and Luffy operates in the exact opposite way. If Luffy had the power of Saturn that day, he would have absolutely approved Vegapunk to fix Bonnie, and then what would happen? Kuma would be his friend, loyal friend for life. No strings attached. It is a debt that could never be paid back, and Kuma is the kind of honorable character who would never go back on his word. In my opinion, this highlights two things about Saturn. Firstly is his distrusting nature, again as a foil to Luffy. Despite all of his knowledge as a Gorosei Cypher Pole, there's no way that he does not know everything that it is possible to know about Kuma, but he still can't risk trusting him. And second, it highlights the Gorosei and Saturn's tendency to punish the good. Like, it almost seems worthwhile to speculate that the Gorosei fears someone of Kuma's character. He is too good for this world, literally. And honestly, this theory has some merit. Kuma has lived his life following the light of Nika. He also possesses the capacity to one day become an incredible leader against them. Like Nika, Kuma inspires faith and possesses the will that no pain that they could possibly inflict would ever break him. It's possible that they fear someone like Kuma more than they would just straight evil. Certainly, that's the only great rationale that I have for Saturn's desire to completely wipe Kuma's personality. What harm is really done if Kuma runs away with Bonnie and lives the rest of his life in peace? Or maybe a better example, what harm is done if you allow Kuma and Bonnie to see each other, as he remains a Shichibukai and PX0. It's just unnecessarily evil. And there was still time to potentially brainwash Bonnie into becoming a part of your government. But I suppose to actually define this, I really do think that the government fears general belief in Nika. Kuma actively teaches it, which we see again in this chapter. And I think that belief in this figure in a way makes it real. The ideology itself is a danger, as part of the inherited will, or however you want to make sense of it. So this makes it clear that probably the objective with Kuma is to first erase his personality and then dispose of Bonnie, who can't be allowed to live anyway. So yeah, this makes it all the worse. It makes me hate Saturn all the more, like this was all a pretense. They never had any intention of curing Bonnie. It was all for the sake of eliminating threats and minimizing risk. I would also hazard a guess that belief in Nico was at least one of the reasons that the Buccaneer race itself was exterminated. But we were talking about Saturn's tendency to punish the good, and obviously it applies to Bonnie and Kuma, but this chapter makes it clear that it also applies to Admiral Kizaru. People often talk about plot being convenient, but in this case I think that it's somewhat convenient that they even allowed Kizaru to basically hang out with Kuma and Bonnie. Perhaps the logic is something like Vegapunk is incredibly important, the lab is very important, so you need an admiral to just basically live there. In the case that Vegapunk or Kuma try anything at all, which if you establish the Gorosei and Saturn as being distrustful, then, you know, maybe that does check out. But we were just talking about Vegapunk, the genius, being short-sighted. Well, I think Saturn, who's also probably a very intelligent person, is also being very short-sighted here because, look, the scenes between Kizaru, Bonnie, and Kuma and Vegapunk were just beautiful and glorious. I love seeing Kizaru like this. And I think that I have to believe, and I suspect, we will obviously see that this relationship is going to have some ramifications. I mean, it already has had ramifications because it's essentially been telegraphed to us that Kizaru, his heart is not in this fight. And of course now we fully understand why. Speaking about how my perception of the characters is still actively changing on a chapter by chapter basis, the same applies to Kizaru. Am I somewhat understanding of his heart not being in the fight? Yeah, of course. But I'm also madder than I ever was for him not doing more. I want this man to fight for what it is that he actually wants. I'm tired of his foot being half in and half out. If it's really the Marines that you've decided are justice and they must succeed, you must do what you have to for the sake of the world government, then just say it and eat it. Own being an evil scumbag and doing what you need to for your worldview, or do what your heart is telling you to do. I know he has goodness inside of him. This man literally saw Kuma cry tears of joy at the prospects of giving up everything that is him for the sake of Bonnie, a totally innocent child. There's a reason that Oda decided to depict Kizaru's face hidden in shadow during this moment. He's conflicted and this makes me want more from him. And maybe that's the feeling that Oda is hoping to give us. I've said this before, this chapter inspires me to do so again. Do not be too surprised if Kizaru does something, one way or the other. I imagine it could be a moment. Hell, even Kizaru doing nothing could be a moment. But yeah, like I said, this just reminds me that Saturn is out here torturing good people, both in straightforward ways and subtle ways. While I'm mad at Kizaru, I do appreciate the loyalty that he has shown to the government. I think that you could potentially draw comparisons between Kuma and Kizaru, some of the most trustworthy people that exist. And this feels like the only thing that Saturn could have done to break him. Maybe the story really goes that, similar to Kuma, Kizaru never breaks. While I would despise it, I can also appreciate it as a story. Oda making me hate characters I want to love. And certainly it would continue the trend of Oda making me feel things. But yeah guys, if you haven't gathered, I mean, I've said this over the last several chapters, it continues in this one. This flashback has been utterly masterful. And while I did not anticipate the events of this chapter and Oda really lingering here, I feel like I see the vision. Kuma somehow, someway discovered that Bonnie was in danger. He has no personality left, but Vegapunk could not take his will, his most basic desires. Foremost among this is to be there for Bonnie when he could not be there for her mother. Bonnie is Kuma's treasure, and just like any pirate, he will defend her and protect her to the death. Basically, guys, I think that he has to be there, and this flashback makes that abundantly clear. So it looks like that we were wrong, that chapter 1100 on the dot would end up being this big doom moment. I love the chapter, don't get me wrong, but that's not what this chapter is. But another concept we didn't talk about in the last video that I really should have is that chapters that fall on New Year's kind of bring the same energy. And my guess is that was what Oda was shooting for. And after this flashback, I am so ready for Kuma to majestically arrive in all of his glory and all of his injuries accumulated over not just recent history but his entire life. The theory that I believe in, that we talked in a reading comments video recently, the perfect theory, we found it, is after Kuma has pushed out literally everyone's pain and taken it, it's finally time for him to push out his own pain and give it to Saturn. That would bring so much closure. I'm praying that this happens. But it's crazy how much work Oda has done with all of these characters. I'm ready for everything. I'm ready for Saturn to just suffer. I want to see Vegapunk be defiant, and possibly Kizaru too. How is Kizaru going to react to Vegapunk dying or that death being threatened? How is Kizaru going to react if Kuma arrives? I'm like with bated breath, man. And like the fact that Kuma has lived his entire life trying to be like Nika, and that man, Luffy, is literally here. I kind of feel like I'm fanboying a little bit right now. I hope you guys can forgive me, but like everything about this is totally perfect setup. You cannot do it any better. It's just like, man, I'm just overcome with feelings of One Piece greatness, you know? Like, we're living in the golden age. I like it. But yeah, I suppose this encapsulates the general idea of the chapter and my general thoughts on it, but let's throw some like random ones that I had. First off, we see that Cypher Pole is posing as nurses, right, in Bonnie's care after she and Kuma separate. Their job is simply to watch her. And for whatever reason, I'm just reminded of Whitebeard. Whitebeard, if you don't recall, was constantly surrounded by nurses near the end of his life. This is probably a reach, but I really do wonder whether some of these nurses were actually government plants. It was just always so off to me that the Whitebeard pirates didn't have like an official doctor. So these nurses' job could have been, one, to watch Whitebeard pirates report on them. It's convenient that they never had to fight, which makes them decidedly less crew members than the other crew members in my eyes. And two, maybe to poison him. Like I said, just a thought that occurred to me. We also saw reactions from around the world when Kuma became the new Chichibukai. We learned that Ace had defeated the prior one. We're not led to believe who this person was or is, which is a cool little side story I really like. There's also like this fascinating comment from him that when a new warlord was announced, he was like happy about it. He's like, hey, Jinbei, look at that. Which just has me asking so many questions. I understand that this is incredibly tinfoil, but I wonder if it was just known among the Whitebeard pirates that Whitebeard had a deal with the government so that they weren't his enemy. And if you really think about it, it's curious that an ally in Jinbei who basically worshipped Whitebeard had no qualms about becoming a Chichibukai, therefore potentially an enemy of the pirate world, including Whitebeard. Given Whitebeard had no desire to pursue the One Piece, this potentially substantiates the idea that Whitebeard's existence in the New World was something the government desired. Basically, exactly like Doflamingo tells us, Whitebeard guarded the throne, but refused to sit on it, intentionally. So with this thought in your brain and knowledge that Shanks had interactions with the Gorosei warning them of somebody, It's potentially boldened lines behind the scenes about what's actually been occurring in the New World. We know that the government will absolutely work with pirates if it benefits them. And perhaps it's fitting that we see in this exact chapter, Umit and Underworld Emperor provide supplies which ultimately built Vegapunk's island, Egghead. Honestly, the more that I talk, the less tinfoil this idea seems to be. I kind of want this. Like, there's so many layers here about Whitebeard and the world government's relationship, their treachery in abducting and executing Ace, and the feelings that Whitebeard might have had, essentially at one point believing that he was pretty locked in, that until his death his family would be protected. It had been assured to him. But certainly this could explain Ace's comment to Jinbei, essentially being excited that the government had selected a new warlord because the warlords would ultimately be used to maintain the balance, potentially fight against their enemies. I also got a little confused about Jinbei's line after this. He says, Kuma is a former king. This is on top of the reigning king we already have in our ranks. The pirate world is really changing. Initially, I thought that Jinbei was talking about the Whitebeard pirates, but most likely he's actually talking about the Shichibukai. The reigning king of the Shichibukai would be Doflamingo. But yeah, we spent some time and we pan around to literally every single Shichibukai, every single member, which was welcome. I enjoyed. I like seeing all these characters. They're some of my favorite characters in the story. Sans, Moria, screw that guy. But for some weird reason, Oda decides to show Alvida and Kobe. One of these things is not like the other. If Oda is trying to imply that Alvida was the former Shichibukai, the former warlord, I need him to stop. I can't be alone with that thought. As much as you or I may hate it, there's a lot of things about it which potentially make sense. First off, the thing that Alvida says when Kuma becomes a warlord is, who's stronger, me or him? Why would she compare herself with the warlord, especially when all Oda is doing all around her is pander warlords? You can say that she's too weak or her bounty is too low, but first off, the bounty can be frozen as a member of the warlords, and it's just possible that they needed a member and that was like the best that they could find. Certainly it could explain Alvida's jumped up perception of herself. And yeah, the other thing about this is that Ace's battle with this warlord is not highlighted in the story at all. It's not brought up other than this. It's not painted as a huge story. We've actually followed Ace's adventures. You know, that doesn't come up there either. So it's just possible that he washed a really, really weak warlord. But yeah, it goes without saying that I would prefer that this is not the case, and I would prefer to believe that this is a lead up to something hype. I hope so. But yeah, then we end the chapter and Kuma is in the East Blue for some reason, and we get a scene of Luffy, and this was totally unexpected. Totally. And it ensures that the flashback continues at least into the beginning of next chapter. I'll admit my initial reaction to this scene was actually a lot stronger than after I've had some time to sort of sit on it. Initially, I thought that the events of the story would absolutely continue with Kuma interacting with, in some way, East Blue, Dawn Island, and Luffy. Maybe he's been ordered to kill Luffy, will decide not to do that, or something. But as I read the dialogue a little bit closer, they say, Kuma, come in. You have your new commands from the government. What is your current location? And he says, I'm in the East Blue. What are my orders? So it wasn't like he was ordered to the East Blue. So this could just be potentially Kuma watching Dragon Sun with interest, which is not as exciting as I initially thought it could be or sort of wanted it to be, but at the same time could make a lot of sense. The other thought I'm toying around with is that maybe Kuma doesn't even know that Dragon Sun Luffy is here. The East Blue is known as the most peaceful blue. Maybe he's just finding places that he would like Bonnie to visit, just as he said he would. Perhaps fantasizing about a life that they will never get. But yeah, speculating it in this way leaves you wondering where exactly Kuma is being ordered to. Where does the flashback head next? And based on my thoughts here, it's gotta be some new story. I would say though that the only thing that I feel lacking from this flashback in terms of what we know about the characters involved, Kuma and Bonnie, is Bonnie's escape attempts from the world government. I believe it was suggested that she escaped on more than one occasion. Akainu has also yet to enter the story. So for now, that's my guess. Bonnie turned 10, got tired of being separated from her father, and attempted to reunite with him. So it's a story of Bonnie first becoming a pirate, and figuring out the truth of what was really going on with her father and the government, learning for a fact that they cannot ever be reunited. This could also potentially get Bonnie from Sorbet, where she was left, to Mary Joie. Actually, once again, the more that I think about this, the more likely this seems to me. It's really the one element of their story that we're lacking. But either way, I am really curious as to what Oda has cooked up, because he has been on absolute fire. What a freaking time to be alive. But yeah guys, that's pretty much my thoughts about this chapter. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to check out my books, The Booms, links in the description. And if you guys happen to read it, please, please, please leave a review. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.